Welcome everyone to the State of the Nation, our media report in the basement of Tonic House, where Roy Morgan now resides. So the media industry, which is what we're going to talk about, is in the middle of the greatest transformation, revolution and upheaval it's ever seen. The dramatic change is both visible and invisible. So there are key trends that are shaping Australian life and business today. Roy Morgan prides itself on researching and analysing all of these trends, whether they come from people or technology or business. And our data scientists, in conjunction with social economics expert Dr. Ross Honeywell, have identified 4 key social or human trends that are shaping the future of Australia and that have relevance for the media industry. First, there's a move away from ownership. Second, a desire for ease in everything, which is being talked about as towards zero friction. Third, the right to forget money. And then the re-emergence of community, or a new kind of community, communities of interest. We've also scanned the business and financial landscape and identified some crucial trends there. So we've had convergence and globalisation for a while, it's still there. Fragmentation is creating an open market for everything. The old barriers to entry are all down and there's competition everywhere. And there's constant disruption. So disruption is just a new way of doing business. It's kind of a business model now. Everybody says, oh, disruption, that's your business model, you're a disruptor. It's just the norm. And the drive for agile is actually creating an increasingly short-term focus. Cutting costs, especially cutting costs associated with people, and focusing on speed and action rather than thinking and planning and getting it right before you take a step. Understanding these trends helps us follow the money in the media business, and that's exactly what we need to do. Otherwise, we're lost. And what I'm going to do now is introduce Dr. Ross Honeywell to talk to us about those. So Dr. Ross Honeywell, futurologist and social economist, principal of the Centre of Social Economics, is going to share with us some of his thoughts around where the media industry is heading, particularly by looking outside the media industry. We're then going to, you'll be kind of shaken up by that, we'll then come back to reality, to today, and we'll look at where the industry is today, the industry that we know. We'll look at it in the short-term future and share with you how we at Roy Morgan believe we should be viewing the next little bit of the future and how we should be steering our course into the future. So over to you, Ross.
Thanks, Michelle. Thank you, and it's wonderful to be here in the basement. It's great to be here at Tonic House. I love this building. So what I'm going to do is just kick off with the sense that we are unequivocally in the era of disruptive innovation. So let's start the kind of whole notion with understanding that disruptive innovation is amongst us. So everyone talks about disruption, and we're going to, Michelle will talk more about this as we go on, but we need to conflate those two words because there are innovations happening all around us. One consequence, of course, is that we now have an attention span of about 8 seconds, according to some US data, which I think equates us to a goldfish, about the attention span of a goldfish. So let's be pleased about that. So the first trend that I'm going to talk to you about is, Michelle's touched on some of these, but these are the trends that I've been tracking and my people have been tracking, and that we've been tracking in partnership with Roy Morgan. And the first is moving towards a digital future. That's pretty obvious to everyone, that it's instant, immersive, it's engaging, and it's responsive. So it really needs to be engaging and responsive. Towards zero friction, Michelle just mentioned that, and that's smooth, fast, instant, easy, always on. And if we think about Uber as a good example, everyone's poster child, it's a really good example of moving towards zero friction. Very shortly, you'll see a book that you like on, say, Facebook. You'll touch on it. It will be delivered to your house by Uber within an hour of ordering it. You won't have transacted with a credit card because it'll all be preloaded. You won't have to book Uber because it'll come, and you won't have to pay the driver because it'll be your Uber account that it's coming on. You will have to get out of your chair and open the door. Towards sharing, spend more, buy less. This is about experiences. This is about not owning cars, not owning houses, not owning music. Towards autonomy is really important. So people are increasingly taking back control, taking back the reins. So self-curation, we're really deciding what we want to watch, what we want to hear, when we want to hear it. Also the right to forget money. I just talked about some of those examples, and we want to forget money, and Michelle will talk more about that. Towards hyper-personalization, so this is priority me. This is all about me. It's always about me, Michelle would say, but priority me, relevance, individual, sense of purpose. Purpose-driven marketing. Purpose is becoming absolutely critical, and it's about me. Towards authenticity, truth, the handmade, knowledge, real, anti-fake, and think small. The mantra could be, stop shouting, we can't hear you. Too many brands are shouting at us, and we want whispered secrets, not large shouts. So what I'm going to do now is just give you 20 disruptive thoughts to take away with you before Michelle starts the report. And I'll move through these quite quickly. They'll be available to everyone, so don't get anxious if I'm going too fast. The first is Uber is just a software tool. They don't own any cars, and now they're the biggest taxi company in the world. Airbnb is now the biggest hotel company in the world, and they don't own one room. In the US, young lawyers can't get jobs. Using IBM Watson, you can get legal advice within seconds with 90% accuracy. And Watson also helps nurses diagnose cancer, 4 times more accurate than any human nurse. By 2030, computers will be more intelligent than humans, but remember, an algorithm can't have any common sense. It can't necessarily have context, and it certainly doesn't have any kind of intuitive access to thinking. Autonomous cars, by 2025, we announced this at the last State of the Nation, which was on auto. The car industry will have reached its inflection point. Soon you won't own a car anymore. You'll call a car via your app. It will pull up outside your house. You'll jump in. It will be driverless. It will take you to where you want to go. You'll get out, and it will take itself off to its next person. It will mean fewer people die on the road. It will mean that many car parks become redundant because you can fit a lot more in if you don't have to open the doors. And while traditional car companies hang on and build the better mousetrap, build the better car, tech companies like Tesla, Apple and Google are just building computers on wheels. Car insurance will become 100 times cheaper than it is now. So the car insurance business model will simply disappear. Electric cars will become totally mainstream by 2025, and the noise will diminish significantly in the street outside Tonic House. In health, companies are building a medical device called the tricorder from Star Trek that works with your phone. It analyses your retinal scan, blood samples and your breath. It analyses 54 biomarkers that can identify almost any disease. It'll be so cheap that anyone with a phone will have access to world-class medical analysis virtually free. Yes, keeping up. 3D printing, the price of the cheapest 3D printer came down from $18,000 to $400 within 10 years. In the same time, it became 10 times faster. By the end of this year, new smartphones will have 3D scanning. You'll just take a photograph of your foot and 3D print the perfect shoe. In China, they're already 3D printing. They have already 3D printed and built a complete 6-storey office building. By 2027, 10% of everything that's being produced will be 3D printed. So, business model, warning, if you're thinking of a new business, if it doesn't work with your phone, dump it. There's an app called Moody's, which I desperately need, which can tell what mood you're in. By 2020, there'll be an app that will tell by your facial expression whether you're lying or not. Imagine a political debate where it's revealed instantly which candidates are telling the truth and which ones are lying. It'll be novel. Bitcoin may well become the default reserve currency globally. And more importantly, the blockchain that Bitcoin relies on, there will be a new thing called the social blockchain that will ascribe a trust score to everyone. You'll need a trust score of 4 or more, for example, to book a flight. Education, finally. The cheapest smartphones are already about $10 in Africa and Asia. By 2020, 70% of all humans will own a smartphone. That means everyone will have the same access to world-class education. Therein ends the sermon. So with that, I'll pass back to Michelle for the media report. Thank you very much.
The media report. With an estimated advertising revenue over $15 billion, supporting trillions of dollars in sales of everything from cosmetics and cars to things like home loans and insurance, and many hundreds of thousands of jobs, media matters. And that's before we even put a social value in things like the news, entertainment and information, enjoyed by all Australians. Media really does matter. So what's happening in the media? Well, Australia's media laws are facing a shake-up. Facebook ad measurement, the errors are sort of illustrating concerns about what can we actually believe and concerns about people relying on methodologies that are perhaps untried. Online news is struggling to turn a profit, and ad placement strategies like programmatic are all under review. Netflix growth as the SVOD market leader, streaming video on demand leader, is impressive and a threat to many content providing platforms. Facebook's purchase of something like WhatsApp that might have seemed expensive at the time, $19 billion in 2014, but now that we know that there are 1 billion people now using WhatsApp messaging service, shows the prescience of the deal. And we see Amazon's moving into Australia in a big way in the next year. And Amazon streaming video service, Amazon Prime, is coming along for the ride, and they're already purchasing Australian drama. So Australian market is set for a shake-up there too. Fairfax's media price has plummeted from $6.10 in the year 2000 to 98 cents in 2017. 10 Network plunged from $4.40 in 2005 to a few cents in 2017. Sky Networks halved in value. And News Corp has just recently posted huge losses as the new media eats into their traditional sources of revenue. Mostly those losses obviously were from a write-down of their assets, but extraordinary losses. So against this background of havoc being wreaked on traditional media owners, new research from Roy Morgan Research shows that while the traditional business models are shattered, media is most definitely not. We look then at what do people in the industry, what do people in the business of media have to say? What we did is about 2 years ago, we actually asked people who are selling and buying media what they saw as the big issues. We did this research in conjunction with Ad News as a media benchmark survey. And when we talked to people, basically the discussion was about the exponential growth of digital, the exponential growth of mobile, video, and automated or programmatic buying of all of those media forms. For media companies, the growth of digital and the associated fragmentation of traditional audiences was experienced as increasing pressure to deliver audiences. It's all fragmented. They need to deliver big audiences. It was hard. Return on investment was hard to deliver, and measurement was really tricky. Roy Morgan, of course, is involved in all three of those. But fundamentally, for the traditional media owners or media players, The challenge was to try and monetize their digital assets and their other assets in this new world. As we've seen with those massive write-downs, that didn't go too well. For advertisers and their agencies, even 2 years ago, there was also simply the pressure to keep up. In a fast-changing environment, so much happening, skills and expertise were in great demand and short supply. So just keeping up was really tricky. Recently, just last week, we went back and interviewed the same kinds of people again, those people in the business of media. And the same issues are still there, and it's just got more complicated. Direct to consumer, owned media, co-creation of media, multitasking and second screening, low cost and no cost experimentation rather than strategic planning. It's a big change. HyperPersonalization, social networking, binge watching, micropayments, etc., all the things that Ross was talking about are mirrored in the concerns of the traditional media and agencies and advertisers. And the velocity of change is only accelerating. We also saw a much greater focus on measurement, being able to know what's working. Viewability, when you advertise online, can anyone actually see the ad? So questions around measurement, really return on investment, is it really happening? What can we trust? What can we believe? And a lot more focus on trust. The concept of trust kept coming through, aligned with measurement, but a more general amorphous issue as well. These are all clues to navigating a course for the future. But let's put it into context. It's worth remembering that media exists for three very human needs or desires. The need for news, the need for entertainment, and the need for information. And we're seeing the emergence of community, this kind of new form of community, specifically communities of interest and ability to engage with people with like-minded views. And the environment for the changes that we've seen in these media and the media business models was created by changes in people and technology and the economy and the media itself. So let's have a look first at the changing nature of people. So Australia as a nation is growing and ageing. Our population is now well over 24 million. And as the baby boomers turn 65, that's the group, it's still the group that's growing fastest. And we all know baby boomers haven't behaved age appropriately as they went through the various stages of their lives, but they are retiring in their own special way, of course, but in great numbers. So millennials, those born in and since the 1980s, are taking their place in society, making their presence felt as consumers and taking up the reins in business. This is a very, very important shift. Australians are more educated than ever before. Some 30% hold a degree. Everything's happening later in life. We're staying at school longer. We're staying at home longer with our parents. We're moving into shared houses later. We're renting later. We're buying houses later. We're retiring later. It's all pushed out, which has a huge economic impact. And increasingly, we're more open-minded. We continue to be more progressive in our views, or so we say, and very open about technology and the like. So very open-minded and increasingly so. However, we are seeing a very clear trend shift here with concerns about security. So what we've seen over the last many years, since the 2000 or even before that, we saw the real concerns about security. The majority of people were security conscious or concerned that crime's a growing problem in our community. And these worries, feeling less safe than I used to, they were all trending down. We just weren't so worried anymore. It was all okay. And then around about 2014, we started to worry again. We became more security conscious. We became more concerned about crime, and we began to feel less safe. So these things in this media world are being manifest in concerns about privacy, about overseas storage of data, etc. And the increase in fear about crime and safety also have implications for retail and media. Is it safer to visit a shopping centre or buy online? Again, who can we trust? And of course, we're more multicultural. We have something like almost 12% of Australians were now born in Asia or the Middle East. And it's an increasing number. those bounces are actually very real. They're to do with external policy. They're to do with all sorts of policy that brings the numbers down and allows them up again. And what we see, though, in particular pockets, like the capital cities, you have larger proportions of particularly young people from other countries. And that makes a huge difference in who we are as well. And our spend on leisure and entertainment is both higher than our spend on discretionary goods and discretionary commodities, stuff, and growing at a faster rate. It's official, Australia is an experience economy. We're spending lots of money on entertainment and going out. We stay at home longer, we start renting later, we've got more money to spend, we're experiencing things. So you can see dollars spent, 74 billion on going out and having fun. So we are an experience economy. That's right, Peter. We often think that technology is driving these things, that technology is changing media, technology is changing us. I think a better way of thinking about it is that technology is an enabler of the kind of things that we want to do. It's actually created opportunities. So somewhere in about 2012, smartphones overtook dumb phones. More of us have mobile phones that are smart. We can have apps, we can access the internet, we can do all kinds of cool things. And the explosion of technologies of all kinds has facilitated the changes we've seen in human behaviour and that we'll soon see in the media usage. So things like faster access to the internet via these broadband services. In the early days, 2000, you could get online, but it was pretty slow. Now you've got 83% have broadband services at home. The vast majority of people have got internet at home in some form or another. Mobile phones are ubiquitous. Subscription or pay TV at home, that massive thing is Netflix. So Netflix actually driving this ability to choose when and where or how you actually watch video content. And a plethora of devices, small, fast, multifunctional and personal devices that are feeding a kind of insatiable desire for more. So again, the smartphone, owning a tablet computer, so you can actually be out and about and see it on a big screen. Having subscription TV at home, the majority now have that, and smart TV. So basically, again, we can have what we want, when we want it, however. The economy, the Australian economy, has also facilitated this change. Our wealth continues to grow, and it continues to grow at a greater rate than our debt. So we're wealthier. And of course, if you're wealthier, it means you have choices. If you have no money, you have no choice. Once you have wealth, you can choose to do or not, or how you're going to do it. But for advertising and media, it's actually more about spending and income. This chart shows really clearly income, median household income is up 40% since 2006, about 10 years. And spending, household spending up 21%, household grocery spend up 7%. The increased discretionary spending power that comes from our income is growing faster than our spending. That increased discretionary spending power over the last decade has also facilitated our increased spend on technology and being connected for news, information and entertainment. Now, of course, not all Australians have that discretionary power. There's plenty of people that don't, and not all Australians are equally connected. And in fact, being connected is becoming a really critical issue these days. We at Roy Morgan partner with Telstra and Swinburne University to create the Australian Digital Inclusion Index. Digital inclusion is becoming incredibly critical. When you have government departments actually communicating with people about pensions online, you recognise that there's a bit of a gap there. We have to make sure that either everyone's connected or we have a range of different ways to communicate. So monitoring this digital inclusion is going to be one of the most important things that are happening by the government and by those people who want to engage with government and with policy into the future. So these changes in people, in technology, in the economy have facilitated and driven changes in our media usage, the way we get news, entertainment and information. So for instance, the internet. The reality is The internet is no longer something we as Australians dabble with once a week, once a month, or now and again. For the most part, the internet and Australians are constantly on, accessing information, creating and sharing content, and communicating with social communities and others. So from 7.2% at the beginning of the decade, or 98, to 78% now online more than once a day, and many of those all the time. So time spent on the internet has also increased. 10 years ago, 11 years ago, it was about 8 hours a week. Now it's up to almost 20 hours a week online. And that's before you include the time that we spend at work when we're always online, or the time at school. This is as media. Online communities and messaging sites have steadily grown in the past 10 years. And today, over 17 million Australians aged 14 plus, and probably lots of children too, have widespread and multiple connections via online social websites. The big two, Facebook and YouTube, are also extraordinary in their reach. So Facebook reaches 16.6 million Australians every week, and YouTube now reaches 15.4 million. These are behemoths, and they're still growing. And the rate of change we're now seeing has accelerated dramatically. Netflix exploded in just 2 years. It exploded from 0 to nearly 6 million. And the changes that we're seeing are happening simultaneously across technologies, brands, consumers, and current media players, both traditional and new. The results are significant and impactful to the media industry and can no longer be ignored. The impending launch of Amazon's retail offering in Australia is expected to increase its number of SVOD subscribers, streaming video on demand subscribers in Australia, because the e-commerce giant, Amazon, is offering its streaming service free for when customers sign up for a $99 per year Prime offering, where purchase goods are delivered for free. So it will actually increase SVOD like that by offering a mechanism to get in. That will be another quick disruption. So things happen very quickly. With all this kind of competition all over the place and all the disruption, it's no wonder that the traditional media in their most traditional form, are in decline. So we look here, viewing of traditional free-to-air linear TV is down from 96% in 1998 to 88% now. Print newspapers, major newspapers in print are down from, about 86, 85%? 20 years ago, they're down to 44% now. 44% read a print newspaper. Commercial radio is down from 73.5 in 98 to 62% now. And use of the internet has risen from about 15% in the late 90s to near ubiquity, 94% now. And as already said, Facebook now reaches 16 million and YouTube almost as many. But that's traditional media in the traditional sense, and traditional media is transforming too. It's being consumed or provided in different ways. If, for instance, we look at TV and we look at catch-up TV, like iView or 9Now, that's now watched by 16.5% of people. Or pay TV, watched by 27% of Australians, or the various streaming on-demand services, television still reaches 94% of Australians. The vast majority of Australians are still watching TV in some form or another. We have to remember that. Newspapers have also transformed themselves. Many Australians read their newspapers online or via an app. If we look at the cross-platform audience, that means print or online or an app, of the major newspapers, their reach is not that 44%. Their reach is now 65%. And if you look at the chart, it's actually growing. Now, that 65% reach, 65% of Australians reading one of those major newspapers each week, is not back to the stage it was in 1998. It's about where it was in 2010, but it's definitely growing. And if we include in that newspaper category community or local newspapers and the newspaper inserted magazines, you find about 80% of Australians are still reading some form of newspaper. Magazines, on the other hand, with few exceptions, haven't really transformed into the online space, but the decrease in magazine reach is not as great as for some of the other media, and we see here that still the majority of Australians, 76%, read a magazine in some form or another. Now, the sheer amount of time, you kind of get the feeling we must be spending all of our time online or with media. The sheer amount of time that an average Australian spent with media of any kind was remarkably consistent between sort of 1998, 2000 and about 2013. We spent about 47 hours a week engaged with any form of media. So that's more than your average working week, but I suppose, you know, spread out over evenings, it's not a huge amount. But since then, since 2013, the amount of time, average hours spent, has consistently increased. 47.4, 47.9, 48.1, 49.5, 50.4. We're now spending over 50 hours a week, and that's much longer than the average working week. And that doesn't include the use of internet at work, because that would actually be always on, or at school. So it really is media. The other piece, though, is media has become multitasking. It's not a kind of thing that you focus single-mindedly on watching a TV program or you single-mindedly read a newspaper article. There's much more multitasking and multiple devices. So 43% of Australians say they like to surf the net while they're watching TV. 44% check Facebook or other social media networks while watching TV. The 8-second goldfish thought comes to mind. So against this backdrop of all this stuff happening, Roy Morgan has recently surveyed over 5,000 Australians and asked them about their main source of news and about their most trusted source of news. The results are really interesting and enlightening. How do you mainly get your news? In order: television, 69%, newspapers, 48%, radio, 44%, social media, 32%, newsfeed sites, 11%. The traditional media is still up there. Now, television, within television, free to air, the traditional TV, 64%, pay TV, etc., 12%. Newspapers, the printed edition is 33%, and then news online or via a website an extra 25%. So you can see it splitting, but you can also see the traditional free to air linear is still high. Printed edition, still 33%. Now, over 50% of people get their news via the internet in some form, via an online newspaper or some kind of online TV, catch-up TV or something like that. So the internet is definitely a big player, but it's still through these traditional vehicles. So what about trust? Well, this is even more stark. Now, this is the, which source of news do you trust most? So a few naughty respondents might have mentioned two, but for the most part, you're meant to give one. So the numbers are a little bit lower. And television, again, tops the list. 41.5% say television. Newspapers next at 25%, radio 16.5%, social media 4%. Most trusted source of news. Newsfeed sites 3%. So trust is still with the traditional media providers. And let's look at the traditional versions of the traditional media providers. Free-to-air TV, 38%. Printed edition of newspapers, 13.5%. So, and only 21% mentioned any online media form as their most trusted source of news. Trust is a critical dimension. This is one of the really, really important things when it comes to understanding media. And I think we forget that at our peril. So Australian consumers have changed forever. We're more highly educated, we might be more open-minded, but we still want news, entertainment and information and communities. So when we come to then the business of media, we've talked about consumers and all of the things and what's provided, etc. And we've also talked about the business models being shattered as seen by share prices and write-downs of assets and things like that. But the media is still relevant and trusted. Traditional business models are broken. when the only way that we got our news, entertainment and information was through traditional media channels, their stranglehold on reach on us was really lucrative for those media owners. And it was really easy work for the agencies. Essentially, success in media went to those companies that created or curated the very best content and attracted the very best audiences and monetised those audiences. And there were some very lucrative parts, like the classifieds and real estate, the rivers of gold, as they were called. On the other hand, for agencies, success for agencies relied on connecting clients' products and services with the appropriate consumers using the media. The economics relied very much on scale. The larger the client base, the better the deals that could be done with the media. So that's how it used to be. Today, every channel's been transformed. Newspapers no longer print, they're online, mobile, app, cross-platform. Our latest readership report that came out last Thursday shows the major mastheads, major newspaper mastheads, increasing their cross-platform reach year on year, reaching more. And as we've seen, TV's not just free to air, there's subscription TV, catch-up TV, streaming. Radio includes streaming, etc. So a purely channel view tells us traditional TV's down, linear TV's down, print's down, all of those sorts of things. But if we're looking at the business, we need to look at it from a business owner perspective. The business owner perspective tells us that publishers and other media owners are also transforming, embracing all channels, cross-platform. The traditional media owners are now channel agnostic. They're going wherever they need to go. On the other hand, Google and Facebook, the new behemoths, are channel specific. It's digital, but business agnostic. The economics of media has typically been driven very much by advertising expenditure. We know that advertising expenditure is still increasing. So these blue lines show us that ad expenditure was about $13 billion in 2007, bounced around a bit, hit a low in 2014, and has increased since then to $15.2 billion. So the amount of money going out in advertising expenditure is still growing and high. Of that last piece, TV was about 25%, print about 12.6%. Between 2001 and 2016, online and digital ad spend went from 0 to almost 50%. That's the problem. Initially, in the early days of the internet, online didn't actually have the mass to be a real medium. And that's why we saw the dot-com boom and bust. The ideas were great, but it didn't have mass. But in 2017, internet's mass and online audiences have scale. But of course, internet with that almost 50% is not just one thing. You've actually got search. So 22% of ad spend is going into online search. Think Google, but there are others. Online classifieds, what used to be the rivers of gold for the print media, is now online, about 9% of ad expenditure. And online display ads, what we think of as typical advertising online, is running at about 18%. Now, despite newspaper publishers embracing digital as part of their offering to consumers and advertisers, remember we said it's channel agnostic, it's only added about 20% to their severely dwindling ad revenues. Not enough to make up for the loss in print revenue in general, let alone to make up for the loss of those rivers of gold. It is worth noting, though, if you look at that metropolitan group, where the online and app version of newspaper offerings are getting traction, they're reaching more people, they're getting a bit of traction there and growing, digital revenue now represents 28% of their total ad revenue. So there is a sign that they can actually get in there when they get digital and start to use their cross-platform reach. In general, the traditional view was that GDP drove advertising spend. So GDP, the red line there, and advertising spend, you can see why people thought that. Our analysis at Roy Morgan Research has always suggested that a better predictor of ad expenditure also takes into account consumer confidence and unemployment and underemployment. And that's in part why there's that gap. why ad expenditure is now trailing GDP. The other part of that gap is D2C, direct to consumer, that doesn't come through the advertising expenditure dollars. Now, we've talked about Netflix and the media brands going over the top directly to consumers. Consumer brands are doing it too. So things like Woolworths Fresh going straight to their consumers, or Qantas. So ad revenue is being lost to these D2C, direct consumer media brands. Owned media, as it's called, typically targets a brand's customer base. It's not about getting new customers in, it's actually communicating to your customer base. It's typically delivered through things like brochures, company websites, online communities, maybe Facebook fan pages and mobile apps, etc. Now, with the emerging phenomenon of communities of interest, we're expecting to see further leakage of ad revenue going to those communities of interest, unless somehow that's captured. So in this new media landscape, there are challenges and opportunities galore. Andrew Groves, in his book Only the Paranoid Survive, which many of you would have heard of if not read, talked about dramatic change and strategic inflection points. And he sort of made the point that extraordinary change creates opportunities for companies to do amazing things or be wiped out. The challenge, of course, is to be one that does amazing things as opposed to being wiped out. But anyway, it provides threats and opportunities for every piece of the landscape. And that's true. There are threats and opportunities for consumers, traditional media owners, the agencies, the advertisers, and even the new entrants to the space, the disruptors themselves. For consumers, the threats are essentially around fake news, privacy, security, and some would say simply too much choice. Today, the traditional media holds consumers' trust. Some of the opportunities for consumers are obvious. Free access, or at least reduced costs for almost everything, greater transparency. Perhaps less obvious is the opportunity to engage in communities of acquaintances like you get with Facebook, and communities of interest, where you have people, like-minded people, finding ways to communicate in a way that they never were able to before. For the disruptors, there are also problems and opportunities as they become mainstream and themselves get disrupted. The golden rules that seem to be applying to those people who are successful in this disruption space are these kind of things. And now that you've heard Ross, you won't be surprised. They're moving towards zero friction. No bulky media paywalls. They're replaced with micro-payment systems. Always on, 24 access like Spotify and iTunes. And digital media is ubiquitous. So it's happening everywhere and it needs to be easy. So simply make everything seamless and instant. So that's what's happening with these disruptors. The right to forget money. The disruptors have moved away from the old model, which was essentially high cost but low volume, to very low cost and extraordinarily high volumes. Lots and lots of people at very, very small costs. Automate payments, adopt a micro-payment mentality. That's the only way you can handle all of those pieces of money. And a move away from ownership. So if you want to be a disruptor or play in that space, no CDs, no DVDs. Cloud streaming, always on, ubiquity, follow me. And the future holds, we believe, these communities of interest. It's worth just spending a couple of seconds, that's all I get, 8 seconds, to talk about this. So we used to have audiences of shared interests. Imagine we're watching a TV program about food. So we have a shared interest in food, but we're an audience. It's a one-way thing. We're watching what's put in front of us. So we're an audience with a shared interest. Then we have communities of acquaintances, our friends and family on Facebook, the kind of people that we know and sort of trip over every day, and somebody says you'd like this person, and all of a sudden they're your acquaintances. The next thing is deep engagement with communities of interest, where quite niche interests can actually draw people together. You might have a niche interest in babies who are approaching the age of 6 months, or you might have a niche interest in some specific scientific endeavour. There are very few people in the world interested, but you'll find each other and communicate online. So it's very much communities of shared interest, shared language, shared values, shared thoughts. These are going to be very powerful. And the challenge, and I don't think anyone's doing it, is to identify and monetize these social cues that go on in those categories of communities of interest. So if you've got people talking about some deep scientific endeavour that, you know, only they get, and you offer them cheap clothes pegs, it's going to go down like a lead balloon. The same rules about advertising, about relevance, about you know, the right environment, etc., are happening in spades in these communities of interest. Powerful if you get it right, really embarrassing if you get it wrong. Of course, relevance and engagement through hyper-personalisation. Ross talked a little bit about that. So thinking small, micro-payments, human language, high touch. It's all about the one person, me, talking to me. Not people like me, but just me, really getting it right, but particularly super relevant, super hyper-personalised. So for media agencies, that's the disruptors. They just have to keep disrupting. For media agencies, the challenges of today, technologies, platforms, automation, artificial intelligence, will soon be just expected. Simply hygiene factors. You'll have to do that to be in business. Everything will need to be enhanced by what we're calling HI, human intelligence. That real layer that goes beyond what automation and what computers and all of these basic things can do. That's the new frontier for agencies. Now for the traditional media owners. And I actually believe the traditional media owners are incredibly important for human beings. I think the threats without curated media are quite great. But for traditional media owners, the challenges are very great. We've seen what's already happening to their share prices. They're a long way along. But the stakes are high and it's not yet too late. If you're a media owner, your unique advantage is one, you're in business today. You've weathered storms before and you know the solution is to follow the money. There's no naivety about why you're there. You have to follow the money. We suggest get the best brains back into your business and let them know you're back in business. I say get the best brains back in business because when an industry becomes not flavour of the month anymore and starts to turn down, the best brains leave. They go off to join digital, or they go off to join the next new bright, shiny thing. So get those best brains back and really get back into business. Recognise that your core asset is a mountain of content, even if it's already been written down on your balance sheet. And another asset, or related to that asset, is the skill to create and curate more great content. And, probably most importantly, and a powerful relationship with your still substantial audience based on trust. All of those things that we've just saw is still there. Put your money behind that core asset. Recognise the fact that traditional media is not flavour of the month. It is not flavour of the month. Traditional media is completely out of fashion with media buyers and some advertisers. Not Harvey Norman, by the way. But you're not terminally out of fashion with consumers. That's the critical piece. So traditional media can use the power of their reach. They've lost frequency, they've lost time spent, they've lost engagement, but they have massive reach. So use that reach to grow frequency of your and consumer engagement. If you don't know how to do that, ask Roy Morgan. That's what we do. That's how we help people. And secondly, demonstrate your competence in your own ability to deliver results for advertisers by investing. Seriously investing in those companies that you believe can be turbocharged with your media weight. If you believe in yourself, back yourself, bank yourself, think like an investor. Most private equity firms, we now know this, buy into businesses because they believe that with an injection of capital and additional management support, the company can be worth more than they paid for it. That's how it works. That's what these guys do. Our experience and analysis suggests traditional media companies that deserve to survive should be able to back themselves. Seek out the businesses that would be worth much more with an injection of capital and the media weight that they could bring to bear. A few clear success stories would see traditional media gaining relevance with agencies and advertisers again. Now, that's not to say that the media landscape is going to go back to print or linear TV. It's not. But the traditional media companies will have a chance to evolve in that new environment. Now, Roy Morgan realised that we had to evolve fast or fall off the cliff, so we did. We are now in business to partner with anyone who wants to grow, innovate and steer a path into the future. We've created a division that we call Live, Roy Morgan Live. It's our own innovation hub that deals with everything live. Real-time data flows, accelerated analytics, accelerated learning, live maps, live learning. It goes beyond big data to deep data. We are our own disruptor. If you want live evaluation to test and optimise in real time, down to postcode, that's what Roy Morgan Live does. We are disrupting. We're a survey company, and yet we're doing this stuff in real live time. If you want consumer profiling live, like in real time, that's what Live does. Again, we are the disruptor of our own industry. And if you want to identify real-time consumer hotspots, that's what we do. So, for instance, you've run a digital campaign. Where is it actually hitting? Where are people seeing it, like physically? Is it West Blackburn? And if so, get out there and get the dollars in. So it's actually taking digital and live where people live and putting it all together in real time. We've also consolidated our deep consumer intelligence into the newly constituted Roy Morgan Research Institute, because sometimes it's not just live, sometimes it's not just act. Sometimes you do need to take a step back and go, what are the big trends? What's coming next? How can we judge when that cliff is going to be fallen over or when that thing's going to escalate? Often it's about when, not what. So you need this deeper level of understanding. So whether you want to be ready to track consumer shifts and plan for the changes, or whether you want to be agile and do instant testing of concepts, content and creative, or increase frequency and engagement of your customers, like I'm suggesting the traditional media ought to do, ask Roy Morgan. Talk to us about how we can help you do whatever you want to do. Thank you. Questions?